it's interesting that when The Winter King came out, somebody came from the Boston Globe to interview me at home on Cape Cod and said that my Arthur reminded them of Clinton. I thought, oh my God, I failed. But no, what for me the magic is this, and that go back to the times where you have a horrible period of time to be alive in Britain. The Romans have gone. The Roman framework of law and order and protection has gone. In its place, you have slave raiders coming from Ireland, you have slave raiders coming down from Scotland, and you have this even worse enemy, the Anglo-Saxons, coming over the sea from Flanders or wherever. At the same time, you have internecine civil war between the various kingdoms of Britain. You also have religious warfare. I mean, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And then the Anglo-Saxons come in and they do, to an extent, unite the British against them. Mm-hmm. But they still go on losing. The Anglo-Saxons are chewing away, taking the land. And suddenly along comes this hero, this one man who beats them. And for a whole generation thereafter, the Anglo-Saxons are paying tribute to the British. The British are top dog. The British have got their own laws. They know they can plant crops and probably live long enough to reap them. They can have children and watch the children grow up. And then suddenly, about 30, 40 years after the Battle of Mountbatten, the whole process starts again, and the Anglo-Saxons sweep across the whole country. What happens then is that people look back on that period as a golden age. And to me, the secret of Arthur is not a quest at all. It is simply a yearning for a golden age that once was. And it became known as Camelot, where it doesn't rain till after sunset. And it is just that golden age. And there's always the promise implicit in that if there's been one golden age, there can be another. And that, I think it's that memory of a golden age that sustains the conquered British for many years. And of course what happens, and we know this from DNA testing, is that the Anglo-Saxons took British wives, lots and lots and lots of them. Almost certainly the British mothers now are telling Arthur stories to their children. Their children, of course, grow up thinking they're Anglo-Saxons and thinking Arthur is their hero. And so gradually the Anglo-Saxons assimilate Arthur. But what they assimilate is not some story of us against them, of English against Celts. It's golden age.
I see. And then when the Normans come along and there's another assimilation and the French overlay comes in, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and they still look back. You still tell these stories saying, look, we can win, we can have our golden age again. And I think that's still the great appeal of the Arthur stories. And that's why, in fact, Arthur has been reduced, if you like, to being the perfect king. Mm-hmm. It makes much more sense to have him as a king. And so Arthur has become, right across the world now, sort of image of the we need an Arthur now in Iraq, and that's what we need, the perfect king to set up Camelot. Well, it never was, it never existed. I mean, if you want to look at it as a quest, it's like the Grail. The Grail was never found, any more than Camelot existed.
But isn't that an essential quality of the Grail?
Oh, I
that
hope
in
so,
fact,
yes.
it can't really be defined, nor can it really be found. So it is the quest, not
oh
the
yes,
object.
And it's always a great mystery, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
we had the crown of thorns in the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. There's vials, V-I-A-Ls, of Christ's blood in Flanders and indeed in England.
Which
and yet none of
mysteriously
these
fulminate at
yes,
different times. Yes.
None of these things were thought to be of equal to the Holy Grail. It seems crazy to me. I'd have thought that having a small jar of Christ's blood was far more important than the Holy Grail. But
well, it is obviously taken on a symbolism larger than what it ever was. I was very interested to note that you and I are both war babies, but there is a very interesting twist in your life, which was as a consequence of being a war baby. You grew up in a very unusual environment.
yeah, I was raised in southeast England by the peculiar people.
Which
That's
is?
with capital P's. It's a
sect,
yeah,
right.
it's a religious sect, and they would have been wonderfully at home in Tennessee, where they could have snake handled, but they sat rather uncomfortably in southeast England,
And reading was not of value for them. In fact, it was not even permissible.
no,
Is that right?
well, no, you could read as long as you were reading the Bible,
Bible.
or there was a series of books that I was given to read about a missionary. I can't even remember what he was called now, but I remember the books. So you could read evangelical fundamentalist religious stuff, but you were not allowed to read anything else. And I was actually once beaten because I was found reading Treasure Island. And what saved me, I was sent away to boarding school.
Ah, where they broadened your reading.
Yes, yes, yes.
There's a fascinating book by a woman, I wondered if you'd come across it. It's a book I truly love called The Story of My Face by Kathy Page. It was nominated for the Orange Prize, I don't think last year, but the year before. It's the only time I've ever come across a mystery, or a novel actually, it's more of a novel, set among the peculiar people.
No, I never saw it.
Well, I have a copy at the store, and I was going to pass it on to you because the whole drama, in fact, stems from some somewhat similar incidents to your own life.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of think you must make this up. The peculiar people don't exist. In fact, it's a quote from Deuteronomy, I will make thee unto me a peculiar people, saith the Lord thy God. And it really only means separate and apart, a people separate. And they tried very hard to keep us separate and apart. In fact, the old peculiars, as they were known when I was growing up, had a uniform not unlike the Amish, or the women did, not the Amish. And there were all sorts of daft laws. I mean, they disapproved of, they disapproved of everything. I mean, cosmetics, television, cinema, the theatre, you know, smoking, drink, blondes, all the things I now love.
It's very, well, thank you. It is very evangelical, and I don't know that Americans really think about how strong evangelical movements were in England, especially in this very time you're writing. There's a lot in the Regency.
Yes, they were.
Very strong movements.
But the English, God bless them, were never Calvinist.
Right.
And that is the big difference. I mean, I now live in New England, and I lived for a long time in Northern Ireland, and that's a Presbyterian society, and then Scotland was Presbyterian. And you can tell instantly whether a society was Presbyterian or not. And England, thank God, was never Presbyterian, which is one of its great saving graces. I mean, some people say to me in Cape Cod, they're very fond of saying to me, my ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and my boast is that my ancestors kicked them out. And what a good thing we did too. I mean, God, they were boring. They were boring. Much better to have them off in Leiden, Holland, and then off to America. Leave us alone. And so yes, it's fundamentalism, evangelical, yes, in England, but not predestination, not Calvinism.
Right.
And that has always, and the reason for that, of course, is the English Civil War, when the Calvinists won, and the Calvinists ruled England. And the English hated it so much that they kicked him out, brought the king back, and Calvinism never stood a chance after that. And there was net emigration, oddly enough, from Massachusetts to England in the 1640s, not the other way round. So in other words, more people went to live in England from Massachusetts than went the other way, because these were the saints. These are the saints, and they're going back to live in this new holy England, you know, where the theatre is banned, where maypoles are banned. This is the original Society for the Prevention of Fun. And
so
it lasted,
Cromwell died,
it lasted
yeah.
15 years.
It did indeed.
And then suddenly they all go back to Massachusetts because we get our fun back.
I've often wondered what would have happened if Charles II had been strong-minded enough to divorce his sterile wife, since he was clearly not, and produced more appealing little stewards than his brother and their children, whether England would have remained Catholic. It's very interesting how it all went.
Well, that wouldn't have been up to Charles II. I mean, Charles II, who anyway was
well, he was nominally Protestant.
Skeptical. Well, he died a Catholic, but he didn't care.
Right.
I mean, he would have agreed with the Henri IV, that Paris is worth a mass. Well, London was worth a Holy Communion instead of mass.
But it might not have been such a difficult,
well, no, I mean,
the
question, I suppose, is what would have happened if Catherine of Aragon had had children to Henry VIII? And would Britain have stayed Catholic? Who knows? Probably.
Well, it's hard to say, because there was such a movement, I think, other than just Henry's wish to get a divorce, that was impelling people towards the secular head of, getting away from the Pope as the supreme. There was a lot of money involved. Let me put it that way.
There was a lot of money.
Henry.
There would have been a reform. There would have been a reform
Yeah.
movement anyway. And of course, Lollardry predates the whole thing. It's one of those lovely what ifs, isn't it?
It
and
is.
I mean, there was somebody wrote a whole book about this, which they decided that there would have been no industrial revolution, and that in sort of the year 2000, that it might have got as far as the steam engine.